What happened inside the Pentagon today crossed a threshold that America's defense establishment had hoped would never be reached. And when that threshold was crossed, the response from the highest levels of the U.S. national security apparatus was not cautious. It was not measured. It was not symbolic. They responded with urgency, with secrecy, and with a seriousness of purpose that insiders say they have not witnessed in years. The Pentagon went silent. And in Washington, when the Pentagon goes silent before a classified briefing, one that was not on any public schedule, one that was not leaked in advance, one that appeared without warning on the calendars of some of the most senior officials in the United States government, people pay attention because that silence, insiders say, changes everything. For over a year now, there had been signals, not official statements, not press conferences, just signals that a significant shift in the global security environment was building towards something extraordinary. The United States intelligence community has been watchful, yes, but they have been extraordinarily precise in their watchfulness. Their assessments have followed a certain rhythm, a certain cadence, almost a certain predictability. Threat indicators would rise, analysts would brief, reports would circulate, and then within a manageable window, those indicators would stabilize, not resolve, not disappear, but stabilize enough for the machinery of government to continue operating at its standard tempo. But what set off alarm bells inside the Pentagon this week was that the rhythm went silent. Analysts who monitor adversarial behavior know the indicators, the pattern of communications intercepts that usually accompany escalation. The movement of assets that signals preparation rather than posture, the frequency of encrypted traffic between command nodes that spikes before something significant occurs, the sudden absence of routine activity in channels that are almost never quiet, all of that went quiet. And whenever the signals that intelligence professionals depend on go dark simultaneously, not gradually, not selectively, but all at once, it means something is about to get very loud. Senior officials who were briefed on the earliest indications reportedly described their reaction in terms that are rarely used inside the building. One source close to the briefing used a phrase that has circulated quietly through defense circles since this is not a drill. And yet, the public heard nothing because the Pentagon said nothing. That silence, sources now confirm, was not accidental. It was deliberate. It was strategic. And it was, according to those same sources, one of the most consequential decisions made inside that building in recent memory. Early this week, senior intelligence analysts detected what they described as an unprecedented convergence of threat indicators, including specific technical signatures that had not been observed in combination since a period that most senior defense officials would prefer not to reference publicly. These are the kinds of signals that America's adversaries only generate when they are communicating something very specific, a warning, a provocation, or a preparation. Observers within the intelligence community didn't know which category this situation fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that the threat environment was changing posture in a way that could not be explained by routine activity. And when a threat environment shifts posture without explanation, and even by the smallest measurable degree, the United States national security establishment pays attention. What made this particular shift so significant was not any single data point. It was the combination, the convergence, the simultaneity of indicators that taken individually might be dismissed as noise, but taken together formed a picture that senior officials described as, in one word, alarming. Sources with direct knowledge of the intelligence confirmed that the decision to convene an unscheduled classified briefing was made at the highest levels of the defense and intelligence community, not at the staff level, not at the deputy level, at the top. And when decisions of that nature are made at that level without public notice, without press availability, without even the standard procedural disclosures that typically accompany major briefings, it means the content of what is being discussed is considered too sensitive, too volatile, or too consequential for the standard machinery of transparency. In other words, what they found was serious enough to keep quiet, and the Pentagon staying quiet in this moment was itself the loudest signal of all. The alert issued by senior defense leadership tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Source after source, briefing after briefing, described the nature of what triggered this response as something that demanded immediate, coordinated, and classified action. Senior officials speaking under strict anonymity described the triggering event as deliberate, coordinated, and perhaps most critically, designed to create a window of vulnerability that no adversary had ever successfully opened before. But that strategy only works if the target hesitates. The United States did not. In fact, the response assembled within the Pentagon in the hours following the initial detection was among the most rapid and comprehensive mobilizations of senior national security leadership that insiders say they have witnessed in this era. Here is what we know. Within hours of the first confirmed indicators reaching the desks of senior officials, the Secretary of Defense convened an emergency session that included the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the directors of multiple intelligence agencies, and a small number of senior National Security Council advisors whose presence at such a session is itself considered a signal of elevated threat status. These weren't the standard interagency coordination calls. These were crisis-level briefings, the kind of sessions that the United States government only convenes when it is preparing to make decisions with consequences that extend far beyond the ordinary operational landscape. And the fact that all of it happened in silence, without leaks, without background conversations, without the usual Washington drumbeat of anonymous sourcing, tells you something critical about how seriously those inside the building are treating this moment. Tonight, sources confirmed that the classified briefing convened inside the Pentagon addressed a specific set of developments that had been building across multiple domains simultaneously, including activity in a region that had recently experienced what analysts believe was deliberate repositioning in preparation for an action that, if left unchecked, could alter the strategic balance in ways that would take years to reverse. Officials acted before their adversaries could fully consolidate their position. They addressed the intelligence gap that had allowed the situation to develop undetected. They closed the communication channels that had been used to mask preparation activity. They identified the logistical nodes that were almost certainly being used to support whatever comes next. In other words, American officials targeted the architecture of the threat itself, not the visible surface of it, but the infrastructure beneath it, the connective tissue that would have made an adversary's next move operational. This is what made tonight's classified briefing so significant. What triggered the emergency session wasn't just symbolic posturing. It wasn't a test balloon. It wasn't designed to draw attention or manufacture a crisis. It was actionable. It represented the kind of intelligence picture that, if allowed to develop further without response, could close options for the United States in ways that are difficult, perhaps impossible, to reverse quickly. And the officials who gathered inside the Pentagon tonight, understanding that fully, responded not with alarm, but with strategy, not recklessly, not impulsively, but with deliberate, organized, and classified force. They didn't overreach. They didn't telegraph their next move. They didn't give their adversary time to adjust. They moved precisely where they needed to move. And they did it in total silence. And here is where this story becomes even more consequential. Intelligence analysts now believe that the event triggering tonight's classified briefing was designed specifically to test the resolve of the United States national security establishment at a moment of perceived domestic distraction. The calculation, these analysts believe, was that Washington was too divided, too internally focused, and too politically consumed to mount a coordinated and serious response to an external provocation of this nature. They wanted to see whether the United States would blink. But instead, the opposite happened. Senior officials didn't retreat to procedural caution. They didn't defer to bureaucratic process. They didn't wait for a political signal before taking action. They assembled a response that was so swift, so structured, and so clearly coordinated across agency lines that even those monitoring from the outside, the analysts, the allies, the adversaries, noticed. You don't get the attention of a sophisticated adversary easily. Not in this era, not in this environment, but tonight the United States did exactly that. Defense analysts speaking with regional security publications under conditions of anonymity described the nature of the threat that prompted the briefing as a form of strategic probing, a deliberate effort to map the edges of American resolve and institutional coherence. But American officials proved tonight that both of those qualities remain intact. Their response was not only swift, it was calibrated so precisely that those observing it from the outside would have understood immediately that this was not a reactive, improvised answer. This was a prepared response, and that distinction matters enormously because it shows that the United States intelligence community had anticipated this kind of move, had prepared for it, and was ready to act on it the moment the indicators confirmed it was underway. It shows that the Pentagon is not simply reacting to the world, it is shaping it. As reports continued emerging throughout the evening, we learn more about the full scale of what was coordinated in the hours surrounding tonight's classified briefing. Senior military commanders carried out an accelerated review of operational readiness across multiple regional commands, forcing an immediate reassessment of posture in areas that had previously been considered low priority. Intelligence agency directors targeted information gaps that had been quietly widening in recent months, gaps that had been flagged internally but had not yet risen to the level of emergency action until tonight. Diplomatic officials operating through secure channels reportedly activated contingency communication protocols used by American partners to coordinate responses to rapidly evolving security situations. This wasn't just an internal government meeting. This wasn't just a routine intelligence review. This was a mobilization of America's full national security architecture. This was a coordinated, classified, multi-agency response to a threat that officials clearly believe is not theoretical. And coordinated multi-agency response is the one thing that sophisticated adversaries have long believed the United States could no longer mount quickly. Not in this political environment, not in this era of institutional friction. For every moment of perceived American weakness they have exploited, American officials have countered tonight with something that dismantles that assumption entirely. Remember, those who have sought to test American resolve in moments of perceived vulnerability have consistently made the same miscalculation. They thought political division inside Washington would translate into operational paralysis. They thought the pace of domestic debate would slow the pace of national security response. They thought the era of rapid, coordinated, classified American action had passed. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. The political noise stopped at the Pentagon's door. The institutional machinery of American national security responded with precision, not with paralysis. And the silence that preceded tonight's briefing, the silence that so many interpreted as absence, turns out to have been something else entirely. It was preparation. What makes this moment so critical and so revealing is that tonight's events happened at a time when senior American leadership is navigating pressures from every direction simultaneously. Defense hawks want escalatory dominance and visible strength. Diplomatic voices want de-escalation and structured dialogue. Fiscal pressures demand restraint in the application of military resources. Allied governments want reassurance that American commitments remain ironclad. Senior leadership is balancing all of these demands while simultaneously managing an intelligence environment that by all accounts has become more complex and more dangerous than at any point in recent years. And when leaders operating under that kind of pressure make sudden, unscheduled moves, classified moves, silent moves, they are not doing it from comfort. They are doing it because the intelligence in front of them leaves no alternative. They are doing it because the cost of inaction in this particular moment has been assessed as greater than the cost of action. And that assessment, that judgment call made in a room that the public will never see, in a briefing whose contents may not be disclosed for years, is the most consequential decision made inside the Pentagon tonight. The formal posture adopted by senior defense leadership tonight, now communicated through secure channels to American allies and partners, was designed to signal clearly that the United States is not willing to allow the current trajectory of events to continue unchallenged. Officials said plainly that the activity which triggered tonight's classified briefing was inconsistent with the established norms of responsible state behavior in a contested security environment. That is carefully crafted diplomatic language for, we know exactly what you are doing. We know exactly why you are doing it. And we are telling you directly and without ambiguity that we will not allow it to succeed. You do not usually hear that tone from the United States Department of Defense unless the intelligence picture has crossed a threshold that officials consider genuinely serious. Tonight, it crossed that threshold. And tonight, American officials made sure that message was received, not through a press conference, not through a public statement, but through the channels that matter most to those who need to hear it. Meanwhile, senior American leadership addressed the national security community directly tonight in remarks that were described by those present as unusually direct, unusually sober, and unusually personal. The message was unambiguous. We are not caught off guard, we are not unprepared, and we are not willing to allow any actor, state or otherwise, to mistake American restraint for American weakness. The intelligence before us tonight demands action, and action is what the men and women of this institution will deliver. And History will record this moment as one in which the United States chose clarity over comfort and resolve over retreat. These are not rhetorical flourishes crafted for public consumption. These are statements from an institution that understands exactly how high the stakes have become and has chosen deliberately and with full awareness of the consequences to meet those stakes directly. Here's what makes the situation even more alarming. What triggered tonight's classified briefing was not an isolated event, along with the primary intelligence development that convened senior officials. Secondary actors operating in adjacent theaters simultaneously increased their own activity in ways that analysts believe were coordinated, not coincidental. Communication patterns between known adversarial nodes spiked in the 48 hours preceding the briefing in a manner consistent with pre-operational signaling. Economic and logistical infrastructure in regions of strategic sensitivity showed movement patterns that align with preparation rather than routine activity. All of this happened within the same compressed window of time. When multiple actors move multiple pieces simultaneously in multiple domains across multiple regions, it is not a coincidence. It is a signal. And American intelligence officials tonight believe they understand what that signal means. Analysts are now considering several possibilities that tonight's classified briefing was designed to address. One is that an adversary is preparing a direct challenge to an American commitment, a move designed to test whether Washington will defend what it has pledged to defend. Another is that the activity detected represents an attempt to establish a new baseline, to normalize behavior that, if allowed to continue unchallenged, would permanently expand the range of options available to that adversary. A third possibility, the one reportedly causing the deepest concern among senior officials, is that what we are seeing is the early phase of a coordinated, multi-domain campaign intended to erode American strategic positioning before a larger move is made. But tonight, American officials took that third option off the table, or at least narrowed it significantly. They didn't wait for confirmation. They didn't wait for a second indicator. They didn't defer to bureaucratic timelines. They acted on the intelligence they had with the resources at their disposal in the window available to them. And in doing so, they sent a message that no press conference could have delivered as clearly. What we are watching tonight is a test of institutional resolve. America's adversaries want to see whether internal political pressure has degraded the capacity of the U.S. national security apparatus to respond rapidly and coherently to external provocation. American officials want to demonstrate that it has not, that the machinery of national security remains capable of operating at the highest level, regardless of what is happening in the political environment surrounding it. Allied governments want to prevent the emergence of a world in which American silence is interpreted as American retreat. And the American public, largely unaware of what transpired tonight inside that building, deserves to know that the people responsible for their security took this moment seriously. Because they did, tonight we have heard from sources who are now monitoring the situation with extraordinary care and attention. They say the classified briefing did not end with a single decision. It ended with a framework, a set of contingency responses that are now active and will remain active until the intelligence picture changes. They say the level of interagency coordination achieved tonight represents something that officials did not know was still possible at this speed, and the speed itself is being treated as a proof of concept that will have implications well beyond this particular situation. And they say that the adversary whose activity triggered this response is, even now, almost certainly reassessing its assumptions about what the United States is willing to do and how quickly it is capable of doing it. But the Pentagon is not waiting for that reassessment to conclude. In fact, American officials are actively shaping the environment in which that reassessment is taking place. Their response tonight, deliberate, classified, and coordinated, sent a message to every actor watching that the United States remains capable of acting with decisiveness. And it sent a message to every ally watching that American commitments are not conditional on American domestic comfort. As the hours ahead unfold, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly triggered tonight's extraordinary sequence of events inside the Pentagon. But what we do know is that the response was timely. It closed a window of vulnerability before that window could be fully exploited. It demonstrated a level of institutional coherence that America's adversaries had wagered no longer existed, and it reminded every government watching, allied, neutral, and adversarial alike, that the United States national security establishment, whatever its internal pressures, remains capable of acting with speed and purpose when the intelligence demands it. What happens next will depend on what choices are made in the hours and days ahead, both in Washington and by those whose actions brought us to this moment. If those who provoked this response choose restraint, Tonight may be remembered as the moment a crisis was quietly prevented before it could become a catastrophe. If they do not, American officials have already shown tonight that they are ready. They have shown they are watching. They have shown they are prepared to respond. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, those who have sought to exploit perceived American vulnerability appear to be reconsidering. The situation is quiet, too quiet, and when adversaries go quiet after a provocation of this nature, it means they are thinking. It means they are recalculating. It means they are choosing their next move with a level of care that they perhaps did not feel was necessary before tonight. Because tonight, inside a building that said nothing to the public, American officials proved something important, something adversaries have had to learn and relearn across decades of miscalculation, that American silence is not American absence, that American restraint is not American weakness, and that when the intelligence is clear enough and the stakes are high enough, the Pentagon will act swiftly, secretly, and with a precision that changes the calculus for everyone watching. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is absolutely clear. The briefing happened. The response was real. And nothing, and for those who need to understand this, will ever be quite the same again. We will be here, watching every detail as the next phase begins to unfold.